Hello, Western Civ 106 class. Welcome to week 4. And anyhow, I just want to just mention a few things from this last week and where we're going into now with ancient Israel. So first of all, for some clarity, I saw that a lot of you, I tried to respond as many of you as possible if I thought you misunderstood some things. So in the text, I mentioned that there is a tradition, a church tradition, that St. Mark brought Christianity into Egypt in the first century. I just want to make it clear that that is a church tradition and that secular historians don't necessarily teach that. I'm not saying that it didn't happen. I'm just simply saying that that's not really something that there's like really solid evidence for, but it is a church tradition. Okay, and so I just want to mention that. Also, I think some of you thought of. I wasn't quite clear if some of you thought that Christianity started in Egypt, and really, according to the New Testament in the book of Acts, it started in the term Christian started in Antioch, but not Alexandria. But it certainly was a major center of Christianity, and one of the things that I was trying to make clear is that much of the first centuries of Christianity were heavily influenced by Egypt, and as we saw with the monasteries, for example, as well. So the Isis, the Mary and Jesus as the God child in the arms of the mother motif. There's certain things that we definitely saw looked very similar to Christian art or motifs. By the way, the neighbor kids are like playing like so hard, so you might be hearing kids screaming. Everybody's okay. Just a lot of action going on outside of this apartment. Anyways, so I wanted to just make clear that it's a major influence, and that in Alexandria it really seems to start there, but it's not necessarily the exact place that all of Christianity started, if that makes sense. Okay, and then, the other thing that I wanted some of you to realize is that when we're talking about Akhenaten and what looks to be an influence on ancient Israel and Judaism and Christianity, we were talking about 1,300 years before Jesus that Akhenaten was on the scene. So while we're seeing that those ideas were out there, was Akhenaten having a residual effect 1,300 years later? That's something we got to be careful about how we're stretching that out. But, I mean, these are all just different things we have to consider as we're reading through this. Certainly you didn't lose any points if you were just kind of talking about that as a potential influence. I just want us to pause and think about that for a moment, about the distance of time between Akhenaten and by the time we get to Christianity. And in fact, also, a book I bought in Leiden, Netherlands here, it's called Christianizing Egypt, Syncretism and Local Worlds in Late Antiquities. Not a very easy read, to be honest. It's but the topic is at the heart of what we covered. I bought this book and read it several years after I actually made this lecture. And in other words, I just recently kind of came across this. And this really shows that even though Christianity was made official, it took centuries to really... The old religions were still being incorporated into people's daily lives, even though maybe officially that wasn't okay. And we see that happen in other parts of the world, and especially when there's conversions. Okay, and I'll talk about that even with Buddhism later on, and we'll go into more of a detail when we cover Christianity in the future as well. Well, we will actually talk about Christianity heavily, and we'll even go into Christianity within and its influence in the rest of Africa as well, other parts of the world that you're not expecting maybe for us to have a big discussion on when it comes to this. Okay, so just quickly to say, this book I have recommended in one of the presentations that I read this in my class on ancient Israel at UC Santa Cruz, where I get a lot of information that would cover from my lectures in the ancient Israel section. And just really quick, I want to mention a few things. One, keep in mind that most educated Christians and rabbis read this history as we're reading it, and even the whole debate about whether or not Joshua took place, and most of them are comfortable with this, or a good chunk of them. I don't know if I want to use the word most. In other words, there are many Christian ministers and rabbis who don't see the history in the Bible as literal history, but they consider it holy history. And what I mean by that is they believe that it's history that's God-inspired stories to tell us God-inspired truths, but they don't commit to the history itself. For many in this class that are literal believers in the Bible, this section will be a little jarring, because there are plenty of branches of Christianity that teach that the stories, the history in the Bible, that has to be accepted as literal history. So what I want you to be aware, though, is this is not an attack on your faith. And remember, as I told you with the first lecture, you don't have to believe any of this. I just want you to get familiar with what secular historians have analyzed, and archaeologists. And then also to keep in mind that there are many believers who still read this in this way. I'm not here to help anybody deal with that aspect. I just want to point it out. You're not being attacked. And I hope that you can just learn why this history is believed, and then kind of do with it as you want internally and with yourself. Okay, so that's the one thing. And then the last thing to say, I'm going to cover Judaism separately, where we learn about more or less how the religion that the Jews have is practiced now, as opposed to in this section. Because in this section we're focusing on the temple. The temple gets destroyed, and so animal sacrifices and things like that they would do at the temple cannot be done. So that's why there's like a separate section that I'm going to cover on that. And then the last thing I want to say, in my 107 class, I cover the Israel-Palestine conflict with as much nuance as possible. But do not conflate this history with the current Israel-Palestine conflict. The current Israel-Palestine conflict has really, if everybody was made atheist, there would still be this conflict. It's a debate about who has a right to land, and while religion complicates it for both sides, it is not a primordial conflict that's been happening since the time of Abraham. If that topic interests you, contact me personally and I'll give you my thoughts on why that is. But for now, I'll just have to say, well, if you're interested in that topic a lot, I do cover that thoroughly in my my World Civ 107. Sorry. Okay, hope you're all having a good week, and let's stay in touch, and contact me if you need anything.